welcome to another edition of the Backroads channel with Mark and Rich. I'm Mark Denny, and Ben Taylor's our guest this afternoon. On this episode, we're going to be talking antique aircraft. We're out here near Blakesburg, Iowa, and I didn't know this was all out here, Ben. I really didn't even know. One sign says Antique Airplane Association, one says Air Power Museum Incorporated. Just give us a quick rundown of what's all here.
Well, the little bit of backstory, my grandfather in 1953 started the Antique Airplane Association over at the Ottumwa Airport. And he saw a need for people to be organized that were interested in restoring and maintaining and flying airplanes from the golden age of aviation, the 20s and 30s. So he started that, and then roughly 10 years later, he and his business partner were contacted by the U of I asking if my grandfather wanted to buy a collection of engines, which are on display, that were from a training program from World War II. And he said, sure. And they ended up with the engines. And about the same time, the museum's first airplane came up for sale in Connecticut. And my grandfather and his partner bought that airplane, which is on display also. We're raising money to restore that airplane. And that's what started the museum. And then in 1970, he was looking for a place to put his own collection of stuff and bought the property from where we're standing to the north of us, and the museum followed a year later.
So how many buildings are out here on the property?
Separate buildings. There's these three, and then the house next to us is actually the museum's library. There's about 6,500 volumes on the main floor. It's all aviation related. And then the museum complex has the annex, what we call the annex, and then one main display hangar, which is soon to be two more display hangars, and then there's a storage hangar and a shop hangar and another annex that's all for parts sales.
So people coming out here to take a look at all this, where would they start?
They start right where we're standing. Yep. A lot of people, they can read all these signs. I chuckle about it every time they see the signs, but they still come across the driveway to ask where to start. And there's somebody always here. My mom and dad actually live here on the property, and I will be living here soon again also. But there's somebody here 6 to 7 days a week.
Okay. So why don't we go ahead and get this tour started?
Sure. Yeah, so on your right is the Pioneer era display of what we call it the Pioneer era. It's pre-World War I stuff. Wright brothers, Blériot, a lot of innovating things happened back then. Actually, the first 40 years of aviation history were faster and more developing than the last 60 plus years have been in a lot of areas.
But why is that?
It was new. There wasn't any regulation. There wasn't any official regulation in the United States until the 1926, 1927 neighborhood, when airplanes and pilots had to be certified. And that was a good thing. They were trying to get into commercial aviation, and airmail was becoming safer and more prevalent. And then on the left over here, we have a big rack full of unique propellers, one being a Jacuzzi Brothers built propeller. They went on to make their fortune in the plumbing industry, but they played with airplanes in the very shortly after World War I, and now the family is a winery in the Sonoma Valley neighborhood. Next to that is what we believe to be the oldest link trainer in existence. It was a very early version of an instrument trainer. That one has been was totally restored by some late friends of ours out in Pennsylvania.
So this is what they would call a simulator today?
Yep, that's what would be a flight simulator. We have another one up on the other side of the propeller rack that was a World War II era. They used these in World War II also, but it's a pre-war design.
You've got some really interesting pieces in
the
display cabinets.
Yeah, this is a display cabinet mostly full of 30s vintage, late 20s and 30s vintage air racing airplanes, a lot of which don't actually exist in real life anymore, or they've been replicated since. A lot of record setters set a lot of records back then because they hadn't been done yet. And then this is a display case full of a bunch of model airplane engines and a couple model pulse jets and propellers and things of that nature. So then we've got a little bit of Amelia Earhart stuff over here. One of our members who is still with us, lives in Texas now, was living in Iowa in the 60s and 70s. She was actually the first person to recreate and finish Amelia's around the world flight in the same kind of airplane.
Okay.
She did it in 1967 on the, would be the I believe the 30th anniversary of Amelia's disappearance. We actually, on the end of that display case is a couple of the fuel tanks out of her airplane.
Now, to my knowledge, Amelia Earhart's disappearance is still somewhat of a mystery. Is that correct?
It's never definitively been solved. There's a lot of people that think they've solved it. There's a lot of theories, but there's no physical evidence, to my knowledge, that definitively tells us one way or another that that's been solved. So, like, not unlike the Lindbergh baby. That one's never been solved either. There's a lot of them out there, so. But
maybe that's just as well, too.
yeah, you know, it's probably a disappointing end. Either way, so, and they're all those people are long gone, no matter if we solve it or not at this point.
Correct.
So, and then the engines.
About one thing here, 28 horsepower engine.
Well,
Am I
so
looking at that right?
as in cars, cubic inches matter. Now, an airplane uses a propeller, and a propeller can only spin up so fast before it starts to cavitate in the air, like a boat propeller.
Yep.
It's fluid dynamics. So, a propeller that long, anything over about 1900 to 2000 RPM, the tips start to go supersonic and cavitate, and then the propeller doesn't work anymore. So that engine, I couldn't tell you what cubic inches that is, but for reference, these two engines back here are 90 horsepower is that one, and it's roughly 700 cubic inches. And it gets all its power in the 1600 RPM range. That's where it cruises at. And then the one below is from the same era, is, I believe that's 150 horse Hisso, and they were both water cooled, but the Hisso has overhead cams in it, which was, nobody was doing that but them back then. And those two, the Hisso is one of the cutaway engines that you'll see a bunch of in this museum that all came from that collection at University of Iowa.
Incredible. Do you want to try and shoot some of the photos and things on the wall too? I want to take a look at this simulator real quick. This is so cool.
Yeah, it actually actuated on bellows. There was 4 bellows underneath that worked on vacuum, and the instructor had a desk and the controls, and the instructor, with the door shut and the hood down, could input certain scenarios, and the student would have to keep the airplane in a safe attitude just via the instruments, which were also hooked into it all. Unfortunately, ours doesn't have all the valve mechanisms that go up underneath to make it operate. But there are, I believe, 3 or 4 that are fully operational.
Oh yeah, here are the bells.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And there was a special desk that went next to it that had all the controls, and we've got part of the desk, which is actually the rarer part. The link trainer itself, they have them everywhere, but the desk is a really rare part to find. A lot of this stuff is that way. It's just, it's that was a early to mid 30s design by an inventor of all things out in Pennsylvania or New York. And when he died, he held like 300 some odd patents, including a foldable canoe, and he was all sorts of stuff.
A foldable canoe?
Yeah. Yep. He'd like to take his buddies fishing up in the 1,000 Lakes region in a seaplane, and they didn't have room for a regular canoe, so he invented a foldable canoe to take with him to go fishing.
Wow.
His last name was Link. There's actually a museum in his old family. Now that's a simulator from World War II, same principle, instrument flying. The instructor actually sat in a chair that you can kind of see on the back of the unit. And then there's a whole nother computer from that era, so tubes and dials and bells and whistles, that's about the same size as that whole setup. We've got it in storage. It's just too big and clunky.
Maybe when we get a shot from the inside,
Yeah.
if you can.
And that was an instrument trainer for a B-25 medium-range bomber.
That's what it looked to be.
Yep. So that would have been the same bomber that bombed Tokyo
style.
first. Yep.
Oh, wow.
And like I said, you'll never see everything in here. It's just, unless you spend all day. And
What stories would these things
A
tell
lot,
you?
a lot. I used to play in that when I was a little kid, all the time. Used to play in a lot of these things when I was a little kid. I'm an only child, so I didn't have much to do. And then in the room off to our right over here is dedicated mostly to World War II or World War II aviation. My grandfather was also a World War II and Korea vet.
You know, as you sit in this, and you look at some of these old pieces, what does it feel like, I guess? Knowing
It's
that
normal to me.
you're-
It's normal to me. So I know a lot of people that get into like the airplanes we'll look at, and they automatically feel like they're back when those airplanes were new. But growing up in this environment, and I've spent my entire life involved in this stuff. It's kind of normal to me. I still enjoy it. It's just I don't get that same sense that other people get because I've been around it my entire life.
Did you ever at one time get that sense, though?
There's
you
been
were too young.
there's been a few instances. My grandfather had an airplane that he restored that was very rare, and he sold it the year after I was born, and it disappeared off the scene for a while and got re-restored again because it got wrecked. And then the museum that owns it now, the guy that's head of their operations, I guess, I don't know if he's got a title, he flew it up here for our flying 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and I actually got to go for a ride in it. And that one was very special to me, but it was the family connection. And it actually has a very close tie to Ottumwa. It was John Morrell Meatpacking's first airplane.
Oh, sure.
It was their first airplane.
Sure.
And my granddad actually kind of dug it. It came via California, but it was a project in Alaska when my granddad found it. So there's things like that. A few, because I've ridden in all kinds of these airplanes my entire life, there's a few that have a little bit more special place to me, mostly because of family history or friends that had airplanes when I was little. But yeah, they're still very special to me. I just don't get that same, I've never had a life away from this, so I don't really know.
It's just interesting to me to be this close to history.
Well, like I said, I live it every day.
What they did, wow.
It blows my mind what we were able to do from late 1939 when we started gearing up just in case to when my granddad came home in 45 from Panama. It blows my mind what both sides for that matter, were able to accomplish in manufacturing and technology and material sciences and just in that short amount of time because somebody was trying to take over the world and there was a whole bunch of other people trying to stop it. So
A lot going on.
yeah. So Grandpa was a crew chief during World War II on 2 different fighters, and then came back and then was a jet engine instructor during the Korean effort. So he started this shortly thereafter.
Sounds like a very knowledgeable individual.
He was. I will be lucky to know in my lifetime what he was able to forget in his.
Now, what are some of these people?
Those are some real early radios from the late 30s, early 40s,
That's what
up
I
into the
thought.
50s, yeah. And then I'm not entirely sure why we have that fuel valve set up in there, but that's a whole nother animal. I don't even know what it came out of. I've forgotten.
Now, this is my problem. I'm a sucker for old vintage radios.
Yeah, and we've got not a lot. I mean, most of the stuff that we mess with wouldn't have had a radio in it when it was new, unless it was an option
Sure.
that you could get. So, like I said, the collection's always really centered around stuff from the late 20s into the early to mid 30s. We do have some stuff that's older than that, or newer than that, I should say, but not a lot. So the collection's got, I want to say, just a hair over 40 airplanes. And we've only got, I think there's like 10 on display, maybe 8 on display, because we're in the process of renovating the back 2 hangars for more display area.
Okay.
And then we've got some airplanes that are paper only. So, but there's a bunch of really rare stuff we've got sitting on display right now. It's an eclectic collection.
I'd say.
And it was all, everything, whether it be via my grandfather or other people, has been given to us either by members of the Antique Airplane Association or people that knew members of the Antique Airplane Association, whether it be friends or family or whatnot. So all this stuff is done. We are a 501c3.
Is this pretty much unique to just you guys, or are there other organizations across the country similar to this?
There are not a lot of other organizations.
That would have this kind of.
Yeah, so there's
For display purposes.
there's a bunch of really good collections out there. There's a really good collection in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and it was started basically kind of like ours. So they're the Experimental Aircraft Association, and Paul Poberezny started that organization 2 months before my grandfather started ours, and they were lifelong friends. And Paul and I were very close friends when he passed away. And they've got a big museum, but they've had a lot more money go through their museum. They've got a lot. It's just a lot more money going through there. It's a high-tech, climate-controlled facility. They've got stuff from World War II. They started in the experimental world, but they've got a lot of antiques. And they've got way more stuff than we do also. We've stuck to our guns on our genre, on the vintage stuff or the antique stuff. And they've branched out into everything. But they put on the world's largest aviation gathering in July. And then there's a museum like this with vintage antique stuff in St. Louis. They don't have quite the little stuff like we've got. I don't know if anybody's got little stuff quite like we've got, because we've been collecting since 1964.
And still are.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's never ending. We probably have don't quote me, but we probably have the most comprehensive private collection as far as an aviation library goes. Now there's like the Smithsonian obviously has more stuff than we do, and Library of Congress and yada, yada, yada. But I don't know anybody that's got a library as intense as ours is that can be viewed. We don't let anybody check anything out, but it is there for our members or their guests to come do research.
This would be like books, schematics.
Books, you name it. You name it. So mostly books. The basement is completely full of periodicals. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many magazines that are in the basement, but it's a lot. And like I said, the main floor's got probably 6,500 volumes on it. And the only duplicates are ones that maybe we've got an autographed copy and a really nice copy.
Is all that catalog?
Yes, all the stuff on the main floor is, yes. But it's ever evolving. It's hard. There was a big conversation when they first did that about do we do Dewey Decimal? Do we try to do era? Do we try to do subject specific, like fighters, bombers? And it just depends. Because there's been more written about World War II aviation history than there's been written about, say, Korean era aviation history, or say the golden age of air racing, which there's been a lot written about, but not compared to World War II history. So you have a giant genre that you got to fit on a shelf. So it's hard to get everything in one section. You got to juggle things around. But we do have it all in some sort of a library software.
So is World War II predominantly when aviation came into its own, as far as the war is
Well,
concerned?
it just depends on what part of aviation you're looking at. Material sciences, yes, but a lot of what made aviation really move forward happened pre-war, but it was in that kind of, we're building up to that. Up until the early World War II, I don't even think we were involved yet. We still had biplanes as fighters. We were developing monoplane fighters, but it wasn't, we weren't in the war yet. And Great Britain was developing monoplane fighters well before the war. So was Germany. And it all kind of happened all at once. Everybody kind of figured out, just like with World War I, what design physically worked the best to everybody's advantage. And, just like fighting any other fight, you learn real quick what works and what doesn't. But then you look at the racers from the late 20s even, in the Snyder races, which was a seaplane race, believe it or not, up into the Bendix races and the Thompson Trophy races and the Reams races. There was a lot of development happened, just like with racing nowadays. That's where all the cool stuff in the car world gets developed, is in either NHRA drag races or Formula One or NASCAR or whatever. It all happens on the racetrack, and we end up with it 3 to 5 years later in our actual car. Happens the same in the airplane world. But I'm not going to say we've hit a wall because I don't really keep up with what's new in the aviation world because I mess with old airplanes all day. I'm not very good with computers. I don't know how to button push.
It's interesting remembering the biplanes that were used in the early wars. And that was the top technology at the time.
Yeah,
You know, that
yeah.
was the best.
That was all
of the
state of the
best.
art. And we did that in World War II. We did it during Korea when jet fighters, the jet fighter was brand new at the end of World War II. And luckily it was the end of World War II because if they'd have had that 2 or 3 years ahead of time, we'd have had a rough go at it. But as it were, we didn't. And then we were still using piston fighters during the Korean War effort and jets at the same time. And then, we were using, during the Vietnam era, we were using ground attack airplanes that were still piston powered because they did a specific job so well that you can't replace it. So there's always an exception to the rule, but it's always kind of followed, everybody's kind of followed the same set of
It's nice
circumstances.
to hear you say that, though, as far as the piston-powered engines, because in a lot of cases, no matter what technology you're talking about, some of the old technology that we had was by far the best.
Why screw with success?
But we do. Why? That's
It's in our nature.
I guess.
You can always, there's always somebody out there someday will build a better mousetrap. I guarantee you somewhere out there right now, somebody's working on that. And that design goes back to the teens. So that's a over 100-year-old patent that somebody out there's, and it will happen someday. Look at the computer technology and chip technology and quantum computing. Do we really need faster internet? No. But do we want to go back to dial-up? Not really.
No,
exactly.
not really.
It's the same with, nobody's really building. There's a few companies that are still building airplanes that are the base airplane before you start adding bells and whistles are exactly like they were built in the late 30s. They're steel tube, wood wings, fabric covered, painted with, nobody's really using dope anymore, but they're still basically the same airplane. I mean, they're still building open cockpit biplanes for sightseeing people and people that have the wherewithal to buy something. They want something old, but they want it brand new.
But where are they building those?
There's a company in Michigan that builds 2 different kinds of biplanes. One's called a Great Lakes biplane, and it's a modern version of its original self. It's got a modern engine in it, but it's still the same basic airplane. But they're putting avionics in it and a controllable prop and this and that and the other. They're also building what is called the YMF-5 Waco, which is a 1935 design, and they have updated it, but still got a round engine in it. It's still normally aspirated. It's still flying with a wood propeller. It's still got wood wings. It's still fabric covered. They do have glass cockpits in them if you want a TV screen instead of a steam gauge. But other than that, it's still 1935.
What wood is the propellers made out of?
It depends on who makes them. Some are made of ash. Some are made of mahogany. It just depends.
Does it matter?
I don't know. It depends on your pocketbook, I guess, is a lot of it and what you can get. There's still companies building brand new propellers out of wood. One based in Florida, the Sensenich Brothers company. And there's a couple other small ones that aren't certified that are building them for home builds. And the home built market's still booming. People are still building airplanes in their garages.
Some things never change.
Thankfully. Yeah, there was, right after World War II, there was a thing called Operation Paperclip, which a lot of people know about. We were bringing the best and brightest German engineers over from Germany to go to work for us, to build new stuff for us. And there was a gentleman by the name of Alexander Lippisch, who was a doctor, and he was part of that program, and he ended up in, of all places, Cedar Rapids, working for what became Rockwell Collins. And he was doing experiments in what we call ground effect. And ground effect is defined as from the surface to up to half of the wingspan of any given airplane or aircraft. And the pocket of ground effect actually makes, the theory is, if you stay in ground effect, the airplane becomes more efficient, it can lift heavier weight with all the things. And he was doing experiments, and his pilots were out flying the crafts out of ground effect, and he didn't care about that. He didn't want to mess with that. So he and one of our old board directors was his shop foreman that did most of the building or a lot of the building by the name of Ralph. I feel terrible now. Anyways, they built this thing, and it's a ground effect boat. and it's got I believe it's a 40-horse engine on it, and they set a speed record, which I believe still stands today because, I mean, we don't really use ground effect machines in the United States. And I believe it was on Coralville Reservoir, and it did 118 miles an hour, which is nuts in this little thing. The Russians,
That's fast by
yeah,
any
it's a lot of
standard.
things. Yeah, the Russians actually are still building what they call cranoplanes, which is a ground effect machine. And they use them as ferries, like in Australia and New Zealand and the Philippines. And they use them as ferries. They use them as hauling freight from island to island because they're flying a ground effect. They can haul a heavy load, and they're barely touching the water, if at all, depending on the way they're propelled. And so the Russians kind of perfected it. They kept going with the idea. They're still building them now, and they're still messing with them. The car engine for airplane use, there was only, I believe, 2 or 3 designs that I don't even know if they were really certified with an A. I believe they were certified with a B. I've got about 40 hours behind a Model A in an airplane. And then, it's a great engine. Still water cooled, still run the radiator. Let a little sewing machine up front. So,
Well, again, I mean, they're built back then.
and
They
they
work.
built so many of
yeah.
them, so many of them. And then this is the main display hangar.
Get out of your way, Pam.
Pick this up, whatever this is. So we've got some rare stuff. This is the last monocoupe built in Iowa before the factory moved across the river to Moline. It's the 18th one built. And we believe, to my knowledge, it's the oldest one in existence. And they were in business up until, they didn't do much during the war, but they were still building airplanes in Florida as far as 1947, I believe. And it's a real early one. It's got I believe it's a 55 horse Veely on the front, 5 cylinders, only 55 horse. It's 2-place. They were very fast and efficient for their day. This is from the era when everything was a big open cockpit biplane and nobody wanted to sit in the cabin because they couldn't see out of them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So when you say fast and efficient, give me an idea of what
Probably
fast.
90 back then.
Okay, all right.
I would guess that's probably an 85, 90 mile an hour airplane. And a lot of these airplanes were lightweight back then too. Like this little airplane was built in 1936. This is the prototype Rose Parakeet, which has 37 horses on the front, and it weighs somewhere in the 680 range, completely.
Not that heavy.
Nope. A lot of wing for no more weight.
You'd have to be reasonably small individuals to fit in.
Believe it or not, my uncle was a big parakeet guy, and he was 2 inches taller. He was built like me, but he was 2 inches taller than me, and he had the prototype built in the 70s. So once you get in it, your feet come all the way up to here. This is the firewall. The rudder pedals are right at the firewall. It's the getting in and getting out that's the difficult part.
I bet it is.
I've never flown this one, but I flew the one my uncle had with the 100 horse in it, and it was a fun little airplane. And it's been a long time since I was 18 or 19 when I flew that, so 20 plus years ago. But it's very indicative of the light plane movement back then, taking small airplanes, putting little bitty engines on them. Guys couldn't afford big airplanes like the black one there in the background, which is, I mentioned earlier, that's the first airplane in the collection. My granddad and his business partner bought that in Connecticut, and Grandpa rode the train out and flew it home, and then shortly after they recovered it, and then it's ready, it needs recovered again. We're actually in the middle of a fundraiser to come up with the money to do it right. Needs completely recovered, needs a different brake, it needs the original brake setup put back in it. The engine's gonna need gone through. It's no small task to do an airplane like that. And that airplane's got some interesting history. During World War II, civilian flying wasn't outlawed, but it was illegal. If you just wanted to get in your airplane and go fly in 1943 in the United States.
Say that again. It wasn't outlawed, but
it was, but it wasn't. It was outlawed. So in World War II, if you were a civilian and you wanted to go flying, you either had to fly for some sort of a government program, whether that be training pilots for the war effort or doing something involved in the war effort. That airplane was owned by what we call a fixed base operator. So a guy that had, at an airport, he had a business that he used his airplanes for. And there's entries in the logbooks of this thing flying during the war from an airfield that was close to a machine shop and hardware company in New York to where they did all the chemical testing for the Manhattan Project in Kentucky. And it landed at the airstrip at Fermilab in Chicago in that same time frame. So it was involved somehow in the Manhattan Project. Now, it was probably just hauling parts, and the guy that was doing it had no idea. But it was still flying. Yeah, it was still flying during the war.
Were you able to shoot anything inside?
Oh, you could stick if you want to get up in there, crawl up in there. You're not going to hurt nothing.
Were the logbooks actually kept in the plane, or were they kept separately?
Some people have different theory how you should do that. We don't keep our logbooks in any of the airplanes in case something happens, because you can always resurrect one of these out of paperwork as long as it's not deemed completely destroyed, which is a newish rule in the last 30 years.
Okay.
Some people do keep the logbooks in the airplanes. We just don't. You know, it's one of those in case something happens.
Sure.
So, and then behind it is a replica of a 1909 Blériot, which was the first airplane to cross the English Channel.
Oh, this looks like something the Wright brothers would.
It would have been 6 years after the Wright brothers, when Louis Blériot first crossed the English Channel, which I believe where he did it was only like 24 miles, something in that. It was 20 plus miles, so it wasn't a lot. But when you're flying something that was invented 6 years prior,
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of replicas of those built. It's a non-airworthy replica that was given to us by the museum over at Frasca Field in Urbana, Illinois. Some close friends of ours that they've downsized their collection almost to very few airplanes, and that was one of them that was hanging up, and they gave it to us.
Is it airworthy?
No. It wasn't even built airworthy. The original one would have been built out of it would have been wood. I don't know if it was bamboo, but it would have been wood, which is why the tubing is painted brown.
That'd be a really light.
It had to be light back then. Yeah. So, and then the red, white, and blue airplane in the front is actually a British design. It was a British trainer from the late 40s and early 50s that was heavily modified in the 70s for aerobatic use. And it was the first monoplane entered in a world aerobatic competition by an American. We also, in the collection, have the first airplane entered in a world aerobatic competition, which was about 8 years prior to this.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not on display right now, but it's actually second in line for restoration.
Now, is that a track that the cockpit slides back?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just reach up here and slide it back, and then of course you had pilot and instructor in it. It was a training airplane.
So this is a two-man?
Yep. Two in tandem. I was lucky enough to take a ride in it when it was first donated to us. It unfortunately, who owned it and all the history behind this particular airplane before it ended up with the Peterson family, we decided not to keep flying it because it is such an artifact, and we have no idea the condition of the inside of the engine, because the engine firewall forward was put onto this airframe after firewall forward came off of a burn-up Aero Commander. So this airplane originally would have had about 145 horse Gypsy major engine in it. Now it has a 290 horse, 480 cubic inch geared engine in it. And this was its last configuration. It went from the Gypsy to a 200 horse Ranger, which is a 6-cylinder inline, and now it's 6 cylinders horizontally opposed. And it's geared.
I like how instrumentation has changed over the years.
Well, and this thing, it was strictly a competition / airshow airplane. So the less weight you have in them, the better they fly, the more flippy flops you can do. And so it's about as bare bones as you can get. And that's an American Eaglet. It's another light plane design from the early 30s that was restored by a EAA chapter and a bunch of our members up in the Holland, Michigan area, which is actually where they were originally built. And it's got a 3-cylinder Everybody butchers the name because of the way it's spelled. Most of us pronounce it Zeekly, but some people pronounce it ZK because of how it's spelled. It's a 40-horse, 3-cylinder radial, and it sounds super neat when it's running. And the reason it's got those little streamlined wires going from the cylinders is the early versions like to pop cylinder heads off while you were flying. Yeah, so that's kind of one of those ways to keep stuff together.
That wouldn't be a good thing.
No, no.
Oh, an honest-to-goodness biplane.
Yeah, that is a 2/3 scale Curtiss Jenny replica that you could build off of plans. And it was originally built in the late 90s, early 2000s by a group of people that made up our Colorado chapter of the Antique Airplane Association, kind of centered around a gentleman by the name of Jack Greiner. And then he donated the airplane to us, and then one of our local volunteers made a bunch of noise about wanting it, so we sold it to him. He got it flying again, and then he gave it back to us. He's a local guy from Albia.
That isn't a radar scope sitting
Yep.
back there, is it?
Yep. Yep.
How far back is that going?
You know, I don't know. I would guess probably 60s, 70s, 80s in that neighborhood, just judging by the architecture of the box that it's in. But I believe, I want to say that came out of Chanute Field over in Chanute, Illinois. But I don't really remember. I'm the one that hauled all the stuff we got from that museum home, and I don't remember hauling that home. So it could have come from anywhere. I can answer all the questions you got. We've got another slightly rare historic airplane that most people don't know about, even in the old airplane world. When Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic in May, I believe May 20th of 1927, kind of lit the world on fire. Everybody was aviation, aviation, aviation. He proved that it could be done safe, sort of. And shortly after that, the patriarch of the Dole family, as in Dole Fruit, sponsored a race from California to Hawaii. And it was called the Dole Race. And it was literally 4 months after Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic. I think it was August of 1927. And there was a company building airplanes in Lomax, Illinois, that was kind of owned by another company in Peoria.
In Lomax?
Lomax, Illinois, believe it or not.
Wow, okay.
And they built broom handles, and they built all sorts of stuff. But they were building airplanes. There's a company called the National Airway System, and they built an airplane called the Air King, which we have a replica of, and what's left of a few other ones. They built an airplane to compete in the Dole Race, which is Northern California to Hawaii would be, I think, double what Lindbergh flew. That's a lot.
That's a haul.
And it's only 3 months later. So the National Airway System built an airplane, and they named it the City of Peoria, because they weren't allowed to race. The governing body of the race said they didn't have enough gas to make it, which most of them didn't. And so they weren't allowed to compete. They flew the airplane home, and they used it as a corporate airplane to fly people from Lomax and Peoria back and forth. They called it the City of Peoria. And those wings hanging up on the wall over there are off that airplane. And it was believed we knew where it was, but the gentleman that had it had all that stuff. His grandfather was actually the head designer and test pilot for the company. And then he died, and his son gave us all the Air King stuff, which is all over in that corner. That's all either City of Peoria stuff, or the green fuselage is an Air King. And his son gave us that stuff, and we became good friends and business partners in a different venture. But we've got 2 wings, 2 of the original fuselages. They changed things about 3 different times before they took off to California, and they actually stopped in Ottumwa on their way to California for the race. So we've got that stuff. We've got, what else do we got that's super rare? Well, there's a tail section that's got some shrapnel holes in it that I believe is Korean era. It's off an L-19 Bird Dog. I don't think there's any bullets in it, but
Okay.
And then there's a meatball somewhere hanging up.
He was telling me that you had something in here that had actually been shot up in World War II.
Well, it's probably that, and that's actually Korean era.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if those are bullet holes. I would guess that's shrapnel holes.
Okay. Well, either way.
Yeah, but that would have been a liaison airplane or an observation forward air controller airplane, Korean Air, which one of our board directors is actually restoring what that would have come off of, and it's one of the ones that Ed McMahon flew when he was in Korea.
Oh, really? Okay.
It completely depends. Before I was born in the 70s, when it was a 2-weekend deal, it was a 10-day event. They one year had over 600 airplanes show up over the 10 days. And then
it's a lot of aircraft.
Yeah,
out here.
and then since it's been a 5-day event and I've been in charge of parking, our best year was 400. But we figured out that max capacity before we have to really start getting creative and where to put stuff is 330 all at once, which we've done a few times. The average the last 3 years, I think, has been 200, 210 airplanes.
Okay.
You know, the economy's really screwed with people like it has with everything. And then it goes in cycles, you know. We were the only aviation event that happened in 2020. No one else did anything because of COVID.
Yep.
Luckily, we're on private property and we don't take any federal, state, local government grants, nothing. So we can't be told what we can and can't do on our own property. And we set everybody up with, you know, the social distancing, and we had hand wash stations and plastic screens. And, you know, if people wanted to wear a mask, they were welcome to wear a mask. If they didn't want to wear a mask, don't get mad when somebody gets mad at you. We tried to keep everybody happy, and we didn't have any problems. Nobody got sick. And we had 304 airplanes that year because we were the only game in town that year.
Sure.
So, and it's unfortunate that so many other aviation events happen, especially with national organizations or international organizations, because we do have members from all over the world. We're kind of the only one in that realm that is on private property. The rest of them are on, you know, public airports of some sort or another. Oshkosh it's the world's largest aviation gathering, but it's on public land.
Sure.
So they've still got to mess with state and federal government regulations. And that really hurt the aviation community. You know, none of those people had anywhere to go. And then the people that didn't do anything, they found other stuff to do that they enjoyed, and now they're, you know, I'm sure there's some of them that just don't go to fly-ins anymore.
So like this, how does that work? Can visitors just come and look at
No,
the planes?
we don't. We don't allow the public in. The biggest reason is because of the price of insurance is ridiculous.
Oh, I'm sure.
And we get people that come from all over the country, and they bring their $250,000, $500,000 airplanes out here that they've spent their blood, sweat, tears, and every dime they had restoring. And they come out here and they can park it and they can walk away from it, and they don't have to worry about somebody from town putting their kid up on a wing or fingerprinting a piece of polished aluminum. They don't have to worry about that here. We do encourage anyone with a genuine interest in vintage aviation in the antique world, or even aviation in general, to check us out on all the social medias, and if they're that interested to join, come out and volunteer. And then there is a separate fee to get into the flying on top of membership, but I think it's $120 for 5 days. You can't even go to a concert for that.
You sure can't.
So, and then we do allow our members to bring guests, but there's some stipulations on that as well.
So what does becoming a member entail?
It's $50 a year, and that gets you access to our monthly email newsletter that my dad puts out. And it's not 100% monthly. There's some months where it might be six weeks from the last one. Sometimes it's 3 weeks from the last one. Just depends on how much stuff he's got to put in it. Then there's one physical magazine that we publish and send out to the members, and that gains you the ability to come to the flying. So, and it's $50. It's $60. Foreign is a $60 membership, and it's $50 a year for the regular membership. That also, for the people in the airplane world, gets you access to discounted insurance through, I don't know what it's called now. It used to be Butler and Brown Insurance in Oskaloosa. So, I think that's all the benefits.
Sounds like there's some real benefits to becoming a member.
Well, and
and not just, for the flying.
Well, members have the ability to call. And if they know we've got, say, a certain kind of airplane, a certain kind of drawing, that gives them kind of a front row seat to me going and finding that drawing and making a copy or scanning it and sending it to them. Or a manual, or the lifetime of knowledge that my dad and I both have And a lot of that is somebody will call up and have a question, and I won't know the answer to it, but I know who will, and I've got their information, and I can do it like that. So it's a big networking thing is what my grandfather really started, and it snowballed. Not a lot,
handy.
but it snowballed.
Sure.
So,
All right.
but yeah, the shop's over here around the corner. And it's actually not a mess now. The other shops, I'm going through. My dad's brother passed away last summer, and I'm going through trying to the stuff that he kept hoarding that we're never going to use, trying to find, getting it all figured out what it is, and
It never ends.
so I can sell some of it, so I can get it out of my way. It's just, we've been doing this for 62 years now, I guess, something like that.
Long time.
Yeah. So these two buildings are new, although this building is new to us. We actually disassembled it 12 years ago over in a little town of Atwood, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
And one of our late board directors, it was his shop, and we brought it, we disassembled it and brought it over here, and a company out of, Wagler Builders out of Bloomfield.
Oh, sure. Okay.
They come up and erected it for us.
There you go.
And now the original owner of that building, his son is now our museum board president. They used to build airplanes in Memphis too.
They did.
Yep, the Pheasant.
And they've got one.
Yep, and then they ended up moving the company to Oshkosh.
Yeah, they
And they've got one at Oshkosh also. There's only 3 of those in existence. So,
Yeah,
and it would look,
one.
it looks an awful lot like this, which is the oldest Eagle Rock, Alexander Eagle Rock in existence. It was built in 26, and it was just donated to us by the Colorado Aviation Historical Society. And we just assembled it 3 weeks ago, as a matter of fact. And when we have another work weekend, and I don't know if we'll get to in April, but 1st of May, we're going to lift it up and put the landing gear underneath of it and the rest of the tail, and then it'll go on display. It's a non-airworthy restoration. And then the other airplane is the museum's 1938 Ryan STA, and it has been a long time coming, but we've been doing a very drawn-out annual inspection, basically a mechanical restoration, for the last almost decade, and it's ready to pull outside and test run again and then go flying, which I'm very much looking forward to, although it looks like the tires need air again. So.
And speaking of that, I don't know, I'll call it the housing, for lack of a better term, for me.
Around the wheel?
Yeah.
We call those wheel pants or streamlines.
Okay.
They make it go faster, and frankly, they make it look better.
It does make it look better. It makes it go faster too?
Yep. I don't know if it makes an STA go faster. It actually encompasses a lot of other stuff that would induce drag. So it cleans the airplane up a little bit aerodynamically. And that's that's a 1933 design, although this is the third to last civilian one built. And it's very indicative of that era. It's smooth lines, it's very pretty, and it was designed as a trainer, as a private trainer. So,
great.
yeah, we've had it a long time. We got it, I don't remember when we got it, so it's early 80s is when we got it. Used to ride around in it a lot as a kid, and then I've spent a lot of time working on it, and I've got about 15 hours in it, flying it. So, and then behind this is our storage hangar on this side, and then our, what we call the fly mart, where we, during our flying, the members, we get donations of parts every year. Like I said, we're a 501c3, so people can take a little bit of a tax write-off if they give us some stuff to resell, which we do, to try to help other people keep their antiques flying, which is what the sign says. And
all about.
yep, so there's a lot of stuff gets bought and sold through our fly mart over the course of the year, but mostly during the flying. That's kind of one of the big fundraising spots for the museum is the fly market.
Okay.
So, and then this shop it's not brand new now. It still feels brand new.
It sure looks pretty
Yeah,
good.
we've got a heated floor, so we can work in here all year round, although walking through knee-high snow drifts to get over here sucks sometimes, but luckily we didn't have to do that this year. But we've got all of our machine tools and hardware and toolboxes, and then the assembly hangar on this side, but it's nice to have a heated floor.
And you all do this yourselves?
So my dad is a private pilot. My dad is a commercial rated pilot does not have an instrument rating, and then he has his airframe and power plant license with inspection authorization. I am a private pilot, and I also have my airframe and power plant license, but I don't have the inspection authorization yet. I've qualified for it for 20 years. I just haven't gone and gotten it. And then my grandfather was a private pilot and a airframe and power plant licensed mechanic also, even though they called it airframe and engine back then. And then my granddad actually learned to fly in California when he lived out there, even though he's from Ottumwa. And then next door is the airplane he soloed in 1946. And then in 1998, I took about 4 hours worth of actual lessons from an instructor, and then I soloed in it on my 16th birthday. And then a year later got my license in the same airplane on my 17th birthday. And then we've got, on my mom's side, my mom's sister's husband, my Uncle Bob, is a commercial pilot and inspection authorization rated mechanic. His son is a commercial pilot and sprays crops for a living and flies corporate jets. His daughter soloed but never finished getting her license. My dad's cousin's husband is a retired United captain. My dad's other cousin, my godfather, is a mechanic and a private pilot. Is there anybody else in the family?
It's a pretty big aviation family.
Yeah, and pretty much all of us.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody else. I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but.
We're inside the main building here at the Air Power Museum near Blakesburg, Iowa. Specifically, we're in what they call the Hall of Memories. And as you walk through here, you can see why. There are scads of old photos on the walls. There are plaques, there are old mugs, caps, everything in here reminiscent of what aviation used to be. It really is interesting if you like history, if you like aviation. If you like aviation history, combination of all of it. Come on out and check this out. The pilot I'm standing next to is named John Livingston. There's information on him. You can see by the way he's dressed, though, how far back he goes. So there's a lot of information to be gleaned here. It's just an interesting place to come, bring the kids. And we're happy to be able to give you just a glimpse of what's all here on the Back Roads channel. Hey, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps our channel out. We'd appreciate that greatly. But come to the Air Power Museum near Blakesburg, Iowa. You'll have a really good time.